He began life as a nameless outcast, abandoned in the wilderness. But what if his greatest strength wasn't his armies, but his unrivaled mastery of the human mind? This is the brutal, brilliant story of Genghis Khan. Genghis Khan, born Temujin, grew up in a world of brutality, betrayal, and scarcity. Yet against all odds, he would rise from the dust of poverty and rejection to build the largest contiguous empire the world has ever seen. His success wasn't born from military prowess alone, nor from an army of loyal subjects, but from an unmatched understanding of human psychology. In this video, we will explore how Temujin, a boy abandoned by his own people, became a leader who united warring tribes, built a global empire, and forever changed the course of history. Through a psychological lens, we'll analyze the key moments that shaped his journey, the trauma that forged his will, and the strategic genius that made him an unparalleled conqueror. More than just a conqueror, Genghis Khan was a master of human nature, using loyalty, fear, and charisma to shape the world around him. This is the story of how one of history's most unlikely leaders used his profound understanding of the human mind to unite the Mongol tribes and conquer the world. In the steppes of Mongolia, in the late 12th century, a child was born into hardship, a child destined to become one of the most powerful leaders the world has ever known. Temujin, later known as Genghis Khan, started life as an outcast, abandoned by his own tribe after his father was murdered. This child, born into poverty and betrayal, would go on to establish the largest contiguous empire in history, spanning from China to Europe. But what was it that drove Genghis Khan? Was it his military genius, his tactical brilliance, or was it something more? Something deep within his mind, his ability to understand human nature, to unite warring factions, and to inspire unwavering loyalty from those who had once been enemies. This video will explore Genghis Khan's rise from the ashes of personal trauma to the heights of global power. We'll take a deep psychological dive into the key factors that shaped his life, from the early trauma of abandonment and betrayal to the strategic brilliance that allowed him to conquer and unite a vast array of peoples and cultures. Genghis Khan's story is not just one of conquest. It's a masterclass in understanding the psychology of power, loyalty, and leadership. Temujin's early life was defined by trauma, betrayal, and the harsh realities of survival in the unforgiving Mongolian steppes. Born around 1162, he was the son of Yasuge, a leader of the Mongol tribe. At a young age, Temujin's father was poisoned by a rival tribe, and his family was abandoned by their clan. This traumatic event would shape the young boy's psyche in ways that would later define his approach to leadership. The psychological impact of this early trauma cannot be overstated. Abandoned, poor, and vulnerable, Temujin's survival was not just a physical challenge, but a mental one. As a young boy, he had to learn how to navigate a world filled with betrayal, danger, and constant struggle. The sense of betrayal that Temujin experienced when his tribe turned its back on him left an indelible mark on his psyche. This early experience likely planted the seeds of his deep mistrust for others and his understanding of the brutal nature of human relationships. It also likely cultivated a psychological toughness, a will to survive against the odds. In psychological terms, this early abandonment and betrayal would have fostered a deep sense of distrust in Temujin. Abandoned by his people, he would have learned the hard way that loyalty was rare and unreliable. Instead of succumbing to bitterness or victimhood, however, Temujin used this experience to forge resilience and a profound understanding of human nature. This sense of betrayal became an essential part of his leadership style. Temujin understood loyalty not as a given, but as something that had to be earned and maintained, even in the face of adversity. From a psychological perspective, these early experiences gave Temujin an acute awareness of the importance of loyalty. He would go on to lead a vast empire, but his leadership was deeply informed by the lessons he learned during these formative years. Betrayal, mistrust, and survival were not just personal experiences, they became the cornerstones of his leadership philosophy. As he grew older, Temujin began to understand that the world was governed by not just physical strength, but by the psychological dynamics of power, loyalty, and betrayal. His survival in this early period was a test of mental endurance, an endurance that would later serve him as he fought to unite the Mongol tribes and and secure his place as their leader. In the crucible of his youth, Temujin forged a will of steel and developed a profound understanding of the human condition. This trauma also nurtured a sense of justice within him, which would become a driving force behind his leadership. While his upbringing was marked by hardship, it was precisely these experiences that helped him cultivate the psychological resilience and emotional intelligence that would make him a brilliant strategist and a master of human nature. Temujin's deep sense of injustice at his family's abandonment would evolve into a fierce desire to unite the Mongol tribes under one banner, creating a system where loyalty and justice would reign. His childhood trauma was not something he let define him negatively. Instead, he transformed it into a source of strength and motivation. He became driven not just by the need for revenge, but by a vision of unity, a vision that would one day lead to the creation of the largest empire in history. The deep psychological scars left by Temujin's childhood are crucial in understanding his later decisions. They shaped his ability to manipulate the human psyche, his understanding of how to create loyalty from those who had previously betrayed him, and his ability to forge powerful alliances out of seemingly impossible situations. His early experiences weren't just obstacles to overcome, they were the foundation upon which his empire would be built. As Temujin grew older, the trauma of his early abandonment was transformed into a driving force that propelled him toward greatness. The psychological toll of betrayal had made him wary, strategic, and deeply aware of human motivations. He knew that to build his empire, he needed to not only survive, but also to unite a people who had been fractured by centuries of tribal warfare and distrust. The journey from an outcast to the leader of a unified Mongol empire is a profound lesson in forging alliances, understanding the psychology of loyalty, and the strategic use of charisma and persuasion. Temujin's rise to power was not just about military prowess. It was about the ability to connect with others on a psychological level, turning enemies into allies and creating a vision that inspired loyalty from even the most unlikely of followers. His ability to understand and exploit the motivations of others would become one of his most potent tools. One of Temujin's earliest and most critical moves was his ability to transform those who had previously opposed him into his most loyal followers. Psychologically, this is an example of transformational leadership, a style of leadership that goes beyond traditional authority and focuses on changing people's values and goals. Temujin was a master of creating common ground with those who had once been his enemies. He didn't simply defeat them, he converted them. This was a key to his success. He didn't just win battles, he won hearts and minds. One of the first tribes to fall under Temujin's control was the Mongol tribe of the Tatar, who had previously been a major rival. Temujin used his understanding of their motivations to build a relationship with them, despite their history of conflict. Rather than resorting to outright violence or fear, Temujin offered merit-based rewards to the warriors who joined him. This strategy was key to his rise. He rewarded loyalty, but not blindly. Meritocracy became the bedrock of his rule, where the strongest, the most loyal, and the most capable were given power. This was a stark contrast to the traditional Mongol system, where family ties often determined leadership. By creating a system where ability and loyalty mattered most, Temujin aligned himself with those who shared his vision and demonstrated his ability to lead strategically, rather than just militarily. Temujin's ability to forge such alliances wasn't merely about gaining power, it was a deeply psychological process. He understood that people are motivated by more than just fear or greed. They are also driven by respect, recognition, and a desire to belong to something larger than themselves. He recognized the human need for purpose, and he gave it to his followers. By creating a vision of a united Mongol nation, he offered the people something they could rally behind: an identity, a purpose, and the promise of a shared future. Temujin was also a master of psychological manipulation, but in the most strategic sense. He understood that human nature is driven by both rationality and emotion, and he used this to his advantage. He didn't simply rely on brute force to conquer. He used psychological warfare, employing tactics like feigned retreats and surprise attacks that played on his enemy's emotions, causing confusion and fear. He understood how to create terror, but also how to leverage hope and loyalty to win battles without always resorting to extreme measures. Another key psychological tactic Temujin used to forge alliances was his approach to leadership. He led by example, demonstrating strength, courage, and resilience. His charisma was undeniable, and his ability to inspire and rally others around him was central to his success. However, Temujin also understood that true leadership isn't just about being charismatic. It's about fostering a sense of unity and purpose among those you lead. His leadership style encouraged individual contributions to the greater cause, and he made his followers feel personally invested in the success of the empire. In many ways, he used inclusive leadership, ensuring that those under his command felt they had a stake in the future of the Mongol Empire. Moreover, Genghis Khan knew how to play on the deeply ingrained Mongol value of honor. Honor was not just an abstract concept for the Mongols, it was something that governed every relationship and every battle. By appealing to this sense of honor, Temujin was able to unite people who would otherwise have been divided by tribal loyalties. He demonstrated that loyalty to him was not just about subjugation, it was about mutual respect and shared goals. This psychological insight allowed him to turn former enemies into staunch allies. By blending strategic intelligence, psychological understanding, and sheer force of will, Temujin was able to unite the Mongol tribes under his banner. He didn't simply rule through fear, he ruled through psychological insight and the creation of a powerful, shared vision. His leadership was built on a profound understanding of human nature, an understanding that would continue to shape the Mongol Empire's expansion. The psychology behind Temujin's rise offers us valuable lessons about leadership. It's not enough to simply wield power or rely on fear. True leaders inspire, connect, and forge alliances that transcend traditional loyalties. Temujin's ability to unite diverse tribes and build a loyal following was the key to his success, proving that when we understand the core motivations of others and create a shared purpose, we can overcome even the greatest obstacles. Once Temujin had united the Mongol tribes under his banner, he faced the monumental task of transforming this loose coalition of nomadic warriors into a unified empire capable of sustaining itself and achieving lasting success. To do so, he needed to establish order where there had previously been chaos. He needed a framework, a set of laws, values, and principles that would govern the rapidly expanding Mongol Empire. This led to the creation of the Yassa, a code of law that would guide the Mongol way of life and establish the foundation for the empire's governance. From a psychological standpoint, the creation and implementation of the Yassa was a masterstroke in behavioral psychology. It was not just a legal framework, it was a psychological system designed to bring order to an empire that spanned vast, diverse territories and peoples. By imposing a strict yet fair set of rules, Temujin was able to create a sense of unity and coherence among his followers, despite their many differences. The Yassa was not only about maintaining law and order, it was about psychologically conditioning his empire to operate as a single entity with a unified purpose. One of the most important elements of the Yassa was its emphasis on meritocracy. In a society where power and status had traditionally been inherited or based on family ties, Temujin radically redefined what it meant to be a leader. Under the Yassa, individuals were judged based on their ability, loyalty, and contributions to the Mongol Empire, rather than their birthright. This system incentivized excellence and loyalty, rewarding those who performed well and aligning individual success with the success of the empire. By doing this, Temujin created a society where people were motivated not just by family ties or power, but by the prospect of personal advancement through merit. Psychologically, this system helped to establish a sense of justice and fairness among the Mongol people. By promoting merit and loyalty over traditional hierarchies, Temujin reduced the internal conflict that often arose from competition for power within the tribes. This was a vital step in building a stable and cohesive empire. Temujin understood that social cohesion and loyalty were key to maintaining the unity of his diverse empire, and the Yassa was his tool for fostering both. Another key aspect of the Yassa was its role in creating discipline. Under Temujin's rule, breaking the laws of the Yassa, whether it was theft, desertion, or betrayal, was met with severe punishment. But these punishments were not arbitrary. They were part of a carefully constructed system that served a psychological function to instill fear of disloyalty and reward those who adhered to the rules. This use of deterrence and punishment was designed to maintain order in the empire and prevent dissent. However, Temujin's system was not entirely rigid. It also allowed for compassion and mercy, depending on the circumstances. This balance between discipline and flexibility ensured that the Mongol Empire was not just a society ruled by fear, but one that valued both justice and loyalty. From a behavioral psychology standpoint, the Yassa functioned as an effective tool for social control. It set clear expectations for the behavior of individuals within the empire, creating a standardized framework for how Mongols were to interact with each other. This psychological structure was crucial for uniting a diverse, nomadic people under one banner. The consistent application of the Yassa, along with its emphasis on fairness, made it easier for Temujin to maintain control over vast territories and disparate peoples. It was a psychological blueprint that ensured order, minimized internal conflict, and fostered a sense of collective identity among Mongol tribes, turning them from warring factions into a unified force. But the Yassa's impact was not limited to the Mongol Empire alone. It extended beyond military governance to the social and economic structures that Temujin built. Through the Yassa, he ensured that his empire was not just a military machine, but a society, one where trade, alliances, and diplomatic relations could thrive. The psychological influence of the Yassa reached every corner of the empire, shaping how people interacted with one another and ensuring that loyalty to Temujin and to the Mongol Empire was paramount. In essence, the Yassa was more than a law code. It was a psychological tool that shaped the behavior of the Mongol people, fostering a culture of loyalty, discipline, and merit. It unified the empire by creating a common understanding of what was expected of each individual, and it helped the Mongols maintain control over vast regions and diverse populations. Through the Yassa, Temujin established a legacy of governance that would stand the test of time, proving that order could be created even in the most chaotic and hostile environments. Genghis Khan's rise to power was not only marked by his ability to unite the Mongol tribes, but also by his revolutionary military tactics and strategies. His understanding of human psychology and his ability to adapt his leadership style to different challenges on the battlefield were integral to his success as a conqueror. Genghis Khan was not just a brilliant tactician, he was a master of psychological warfare, using fear, confusion, and manipulation of enemy morale as powerful weapons in his campaigns. His military genius was rooted in his profound understanding of human behavior, how soldiers think, how leaders influence, and how battles are often won before they even begin. One of his key innovations was his use of deception and psychological tactics on the battlefield. Genghis Khan was a master at exploiting his enemies' weaknesses, using feigned retreats, ambushes, and surprise attacks to disorient and demoralize opposing forces. His troops were trained to fight with an unmatched level of discipline and flexibility, often taking advantage of terrain, weather, and enemy assumptions to gain the upper hand. One of the most famous psychological tactics employed by Genghis Khan was the feigned retreat, a strategy designed to lure enemy forces into a vulnerable position. The Mongols would pretend to retreat in disarray, only to turn around and launch a counterattack once the enemy had pursued them into an exposed position. This tactic was not just about military precision, it was about manipulating the enemy's emotions, their confidence, their overconfidence, and their sense of invulnerability. By drawing enemies into these traps, Genghis Khan capitalized on the psychological flaw of hubris, leading them to underestimate the Mongol forces and fall into the Mongols' trap. The psychological effects of these tactics were profound. Fear became one of Genghis Khan's most powerful weapons. His enemies were often terrified of the Mongols, not only because of their military prowess, but because of the psychological dominance Genghis Khan cultivated through his strategies. He understood that fear can be as effective as force when it comes to breaking the will of an opponent. His reputation as a ruthless conqueror one who would show no mercy to the defeated, spread across the known world, and this reputation alone led many cities and regions to surrender without a fight, simply to avoid the terror associated with the Mongol army. Genghis Khan's understanding of psychological warfare wasn't limited to the battlefield. It extended to how he managed and motivated his own troops. He was adept at using group dynamics to foster a strong sense of unity and loyalty among his soldiers. Unlike many other military leaders, Genghis Khan did not rely solely on traditional hierarchy and nobility to command his troops. Instead, he promoted soldiers based on merit and ability, rewarding loyalty and bravery with greater power and status. This approach not only ensured that his forces were highly motivated, but it also created a culture of loyalty through respect rather than fear of punishment. Psychologically, this method of leadership fostered a sense of in-group loyalty among Mongol soldiers, creating an army that was not only efficient and disciplined, but also deeply committed to their leader. The Mongols felt personally invested in their success because their promotions and rewards were based on their performance, not on their family lineage. This meritocratic system created a profound sense of fairness and equality, and it made the Mongol army one of the most effective military forces the world had ever seen. On the battlefield, Genghis Khan's leadership style was adaptive and flexible. He understood that every battle presented different challenges and that military strategy needed to change based on the psychology of the enemy, the terrain, and the resources available. For example, when confronting fortified cities, Genghis Khan would employ siege tactics, using psychological pressure through starvation, siege weapons, and threats to force the enemy into submission. He was not afraid to use brutality when necessary, but his aim was often to end conflict quickly and decisively, minimizing the long-term cost of war for his empire. His ruthlessness was not driven by sadism. It was a calculated approach to ensuring that conflict did not drag on longer than necessary. The psychological brilliance of Genghis Khan's military strategy lay in his ability to adapt. He understood that warfare was not a one-size-fits-all approach, and he was able to learn from every engagement, adjusting his tactics based on what had worked and what hadn't. His ability to adapt quickly to changing circumstances was a key reason why he was so successful, even when facing larger, more established armies. But Genghis Khan's genius was not just in his tactical brilliance, it was in his understanding of human motivation. He knew that to win battles, he needed to motivate his soldiers and ensure that they believed in the cause. His ability to inspire loyalty and a sense of shared purpose among his men was critical to his success. The Mongol army was not just a group of mercenaries. It was an army driven by a sense of shared identity and common cause. This collective spirit, fueled by Genghis Khan's leadership, made the Mongol Empire an unstoppable force. In the end, Genghis Khan's ability to combine psychological warfare, adaptive leadership, and a deep understanding of human nature made him not just a brilliant strategist, but a master of human motivation. His legacy as a conqueror is not just defined by the lands he conquered, but by his unmatched ability to understand and manipulate the psychological dynamics of both his enemies and his own people. As Genghis Khan's empire grew, so did the psychological burden of leadership. What began as a unified Mongol nation on the steppes transformed into an empire that stretched across Eurasia. While this growth brought immense power and prestige, it also introduced new challenges: political intrigue, external threats, and the constant need for vigilance against both internal dissent and external enemies. Psychologically, ruling such a vast empire would have been an overwhelming task. The sheer scale of his conquest and the complexity of maintaining control over such a diverse empire meant that Genghis Khan was constantly under immense pressure. One of the most profound aspects of his leadership was the paranoia that inevitably arose with such absolute power. In a world filled with betrayal, subterfuge, and political intrigue, Genghis Khan had to rely not only on his military genius, but also on his ability to maintain psychological dominance within his court and his empire. Genghis Khan's paranoia was not unfounded. Having grown up in a world marked by betrayal and shifting allegiances, it is no surprise that he became deeply wary of those around him. In the early days of his rise, Temujin had learned the hard way that trust was fragile and that loyalty was often fleeting. This ingrained wariness made him extremely cautious about succession, and he took extraordinary measures to ensure that his empire did not fall apart after his death. His distrust of others was not just a result of personal trauma. It was a strategic mindset that allowed him to survive and thrive in a world where betrayal was an ever-present threat. Psychologically speaking, Genghis Khan's need for control, particularly when it came to the succession of his empire, was both a strength and a burden. He understood that the continuity of the empire depended on maintaining absolute control over its structure, even in the face of his mortality. As his empire expanded, Genghis Khan became increasingly concerned with the distribution of power and the loyalty of his sons, generals, and advisors. He knew that any power vacuum or internal division could destroy the unity he had spent his life creating. This deep concern for succession, however, was complicated by the psychological toll of his leadership. The constant threats to his rule, both from within his family and from external enemies, may have contributed to his increasing paranoia and the necessity of maintaining a system of checks and balances within the Mongol leadership. Genghis Khan's fear of betrayal led him to create a system of governance that was not just about control, but about ensuring that his vision would endure beyond his death. A key component of this system was his approach to succession planning. Rather than leaving the empire to one single heir, Genghis Khan divided the empire among his sons, with each inheriting a specific region. This decision was motivated by his desire to prevent infighting and ensure that his empire remained intact. However, it also reflected his psychological need for assurance. He wanted to ensure that no one person could consolidate too much power and that his empire would be governed by a group of his closest family members. Yet, despite these measures, the division of the empire created its own set of challenges. Genghis Khan's sons, despite their loyalty to their father, often struggled with the complexities of ruling such a vast and diverse territory. The psychological tension between the brothers, who each sought to extend their own influence, was inevitable. This division of power set the stage for potential conflict, as each ruler of the empire had their own vision of what Genghis Khan had intended for the future. This internal conflict was not unique to the Mongol Empire. It's a universal dynamic seen in many large organizations and empires. The psychological tension between shared leadership and individual ambition often leads to division, and Genghis Khan's strategy of dividing his empire was a way of balancing these competing interests. Yet, as we know from history, the Mongol Empire would eventually fracture into different khanates, each governed by one of Genghis Khan's descendants, which ultimately weakened the unity he had worked so hard to create. Moreover, the stress of leadership at this scale likely contributed to Genghis Khan's psychological deterioration in his later years. The fear of internal threats and rebellion was always present, and the immense weight of governing an empire that spanned continents likely exacerbated his paranoia. Psychologically, this fear of losing control was a constant burden, and it shaped his approach to both leadership and succession. His desire for absolute loyalty and his mistrust of those around him were reflections of the immense psychological pressure he faced daily. Yet, despite these psychological challenges, Genghis Khan's leadership remained effective, and his ability to maintain loyalty within his empire, even as it began to fragment, remained a testament to his strategic genius. His fear and paranoia were not weaknesses. They were tools that enabled him to secure his empire's legacy in ways that would preserve his vision long after his death. In many ways, his psychological insight into the nature of loyalty, power, and succession allowed the Mongol Empire to thrive long enough to become a lasting influence on world history. The psychological toll of leadership, especially in the context of an empire as vast as Genghis Khan's, is a reminder of the human cost of power. Absolute control, though effective, often comes at the expense of personal well-being, and Genghis Khan's struggle with paranoia and the burden of succession highlights the complexities of ruling an empire of such scale. As Genghis Khan's empire expanded, so did his ambitions. His military conquests were vast, but his ultimate vision was even grander. he sought to unite the entire world under one rule. This vision, known as the idea of universal dominion, was deeply intertwined with Genghis Khan's own understanding of his identity, his past, and the nomadic roots that shaped his worldview. In the psychology of Genghis Khan, this pursuit was not just about power, it was about freedom, order, and the unification of a fragmented world. Genghis Khan's obsession with unification came from both personal ambition and a psychological need for control. Born into a world of tribal chaos and fractured alliances, he had experienced the consequences of division and disunity firsthand. From a young age, he had been forced to live in survival mode, constantly fighting to protect himself and his family. This tribal fragmentation left a lasting psychological impression on him, leading to his lifelong desire to create a world where boundaries were erased and everything was united under one rule. To him, this wasn't just a personal ambition, it was a psychological imperative, driven by his belief that only through unity could there be lasting peace and prosperity. The psychology behind Genghis Khan's quest for universal dominion is multifaceted. At its core, it was a manifestation of his nomadic heritage, the idea of the world as an open space, free from the rigid borders of states and nations. For Genghis Khan, the world was a canvas, and he sought to paint it with the brushstrokes of Mongol rule, seeing the expansion of his empire as a way to impose order on a chaotic, fragmented world. His vision was not about imposing oppression, but rather about unification and stability. In his mind, a unified world under Mongol rule could eliminate division, inequality, and tribal warfare, thus creating a world of harmony and efficiency. At the same time, Genghis Khan's relentless drive for territorial expansion and domination can be understood through his complex psychological relationship with freedom. As a nomad, he had a deep attachment to the idea of personal freedom, freedom to roam, to act, and to build his own future. But paradoxically, this same drive for freedom led him to impose control over the vast territories he conquered. His desire for universal dominion was, in a way, an expression of his own need for absolute control over the world around him, a way of channeling his innate desire for freedom into a system of ordered rule. From a psychological perspective, this quest for universal dominion was rooted in Genghis Khan's need to transcend his origins. He came from humble beginnings, but as he rose to power, he sought to craft a legacy that would outlast him and impact the world in a profound way. This quest wasn't just about the immediate gains of conquest, it was about immortality. Genghis Khan wanted to be remembered not only for his military prowess, but as a world unifier, someone who had changed the course of human history by bringing together vast, disparate cultures under one unified rule. His empire was not just a political entity, it was a visionary project to create a world where all peoples were brought together through shared governance. Psychologically, this ambition was a reflection of his narrative of survival, the idea that his life, starting as a child, abandoned and outcast, was part of a larger, cosmic struggle for unity and order. For Genghis Khan, the empire was his vehicle for self-expression, and every battle, every conquest was another step toward creating the world he envisioned, a world of unity, strength, and peace under Mongol rule. However, as Genghis Khan expanded his empire, the psychological toll of conquest began to show itself. The endless warfare, the brutal campaigns, and the constant need to control vast regions took their psychological toll on him. In many ways, Genghis Khan's empire building was driven by a need to prove himself, both to the world and to his own psyche. As an individual who had been abandoned, betrayed, and subjected to harsh conditions as a child, Genghis Khan sought to prove that he was more than just a product of his circumstances. His conquests were not just about power, they were about reclamation, reclaiming his self-worth, his legacy, and his place in the world. But his quest for universal dominion also reveals a psychological paradox, the tension between total control and the desire for freedom. His desire for a unified world under his rule came at the cost of personal and political freedom. As his empire grew, the complexity of governing such vast territories inevitably led to internal strife and the psychological strain of ruling a global empire. The psychological weight of maintaining absolute authority in a world filled with potential rivals created a constant sense of vulnerability and paranoia for Genghis Khan. His quest for universal dominion was, in many ways, a quest to control the uncontrollable and to impose his vision of unity on a world that resisted it. In the end, Genghis Khan's vision of universal dominion was not fully realized in his lifetime, and the Mongol Empire would eventually fragment after his death. Yet, the psychological legacy of his ambition remains. His vision of a unified world under Mongol rule profoundly shaped the geopolitics of Eurasia, leaving an indelible mark on the world. In many ways, Genghis Khan's pursuit of universal dominion represents the ultimate expression of human ambition, the drive to build something enduring, something that transcends one's own life and legacy. His story is a testament to the power of vision, the psychological complexity of leadership, and the pursuit of greatness, not through traditional means, but through an unparalleled understanding of human nature and the desire to unite a fragmented world under one banner. Genghis Khan's life is a rich tapestry of ambition, trauma, leadership, and strategic genius. His improbable rise from a childhood of abandonment to the founder of the largest contiguous empire in history is a profound psychological journey. While his methods were often brutal and his reign marked by conquest and bloodshed, the lessons we can draw from his life transcend the brutality of his empire. These lessons, when viewed through a modern lens, provide us with essential insights into leadership, resilience, and the complexities of human nature. First, and perhaps most profoundly, Genghis Khan's life teaches us the transformative power of vision. Despite the hardships and betrayals of his early life, he was able to maintain a singular vision of uniting the Mongol tribes and then the world. His vision of a unified world, though founded in part on his own experiences of abandonment and survival, was a grand, unifying ideal that transcended tribal divisions, cultural barriers, and geographic limits. His story reminds us that, in leadership, the power of a clear vision can serve as the driving force for unimaginable accomplishments. Whether you're leading a company, a community, or a movement, a clear and compelling vision can inspire others to join you, to invest in your success, and to help you achieve what may initially seem impossible. Moreover, Genghis Khan's ability to unite diverse groups under one banner holds significant lessons for contemporary leadership. His Mongol Empire consisted of numerous tribes, each with its own customs, language, and priorities. What made Genghis Khan so effective in creating such a vast empire was his ability to find common ground among people who had been enemies for centuries. He didn't simply rule with military might. He fostered loyalty and created unity through an understanding of human motivation, the needs of his people, and a strict but fair legal code, the Yassa. His ability to forge alliances out of adversaries and bring together disparate factions is a key psychological lesson for any leader today. To lead effectively, you must not only understand your own people, but also understand the people you seek to unite. The psychology of loyalty and justice was central to Genghis Khan's empire. He was a leader who recognized that loyalty is earned, not demanded. His meritocratic system within the Mongol army ensured that those who performed well were rewarded, regardless of their social standing. This created a sense of equity that encouraged loyalty and drove his people to perform at their highest levels. In modern terms, this translates into the need for fairness and meritocracy within organizations and institutions. Whether in business, politics, or personal relationships, fostering loyalty through fairness and recognition of individual merit is a crucial lesson from Genghis Khan's leadership. One of the most fascinating aspects of Genghis Khan's psychology was his understanding of fear and how he leveraged it as a tool of control. His reputation for cruelty and his ability to instill fear in his enemies was not rooted in sadism, but in psychological strategy. He used fear not for its own sake, but as a means of preventing prolonged conflict and ensuring rapid, decisive victories. By using terror as a psychological tool, he minimized the need for constant warfare, which ultimately led to greater stability within his empire. This paradox, using ruthlessness to achieve greater peace, challenges our understanding of leadership, particularly the fine line between ruthlessness and justice. In the modern world, leaders must sometimes balance tough decision-making with the need to create environments where cooperation and collaboration flourish. Another lesson from Genghis Khan's rise is the psychological resilience required to overcome personal trauma and use it as a driving force for success. The trauma of being abandoned, betrayed, and left to survive in a hostile world could have easily destroyed Temujin. But instead of succumbing to victimhood, he used these early experiences to fuel his drive for power and unity. This highlights the importance of post-traumatic growth, the idea that adversity, while painful, can lead to greater strength, clarity, and purpose. For many, the ability to overcome personal hardships and use them as stepping stones toward success is the key to achieving greatness. Genghis Khan's early life provides a powerful example of how we can transform our most painful experiences into sources of strength and motivation. His ability to adapt to changing circumstances, whether in warfare, diplomacy, or governance, was another key to his success. The adaptive leadership exhibited by Genghis Khan was evident not just on the battlefield, but also in how he managed his empire. He was constantly learning, adjusting, and evolving, and his ability to shift his strategies based on the realities of the moment allowed him to stay one step ahead of his enemies. In modern terms, this translates into the need for flexibility and innovation in leadership. Leaders today must be able to pivot in response to challenges, whether they come from external competition, shifting market dynamics, or changing social expectations. The world is ever evolving, and the ability to adapt is crucial to sustained success. Finally, Genghis Khan's legacy reminds us of the complex interplay between ambition and ethics. His ambition to conquer the world was unparalleled, but the methods he employed to achieve that ambition are a source of ethical debate. On one hand, he created a lasting empire that brought about significant cultural exchange, trade, and innovation. On the other hand, his methods were often brutal and ruthless. This ethical complexity raises important questions for modern leaders. How do we balance ambition with morality? Can we achieve great things while maintaining ethical integrity, or must we sometimes sacrifice one for the other? Genghis Khan's life challenges us to grapple with this paradox, the need for moral courage in the pursuit of ambitious goals. Genghis Khan's psychological approach to leadership offers valuable lessons for anyone striving to lead with impact, whether in a professional, personal, or societal context. Let's consider some actionable strategies inspired by his life. Firstly, develop a clear vision by defining what success looks like and setting long-term goals that are aligned with your values. Genghis Khan's greatest strength was his ability to maintain a clear, unshakable vision of a unified world. For modern leaders, this means defining what success looks like and setting long-term goals that are aligned with your values. Having a clear vision helps you stay focused, even when faced with obstacles. Whether you're building a business, a community, or a personal brand, define your purpose and align your actions with that vision. Secondly, understand the psychology of loyalty by recognizing that true commitment stems from more than just authority. Genghis Khan's meritocratic system, which rewarded loyalty and performance, offers a great example of how to foster a sense of trust. Look for ways to motivate others by recognizing their contributions and rewarding hard work. Be fair and just, and always lead by example. Thirdly, use fear strategically, not as a means of oppression, but as an awareness of emotional influence. Genghis Khan knew how to create fear in his enemies, but he also understood the importance of controlling that fear to maintain order. In today's world, this doesn't mean using fear as a tool of oppression. Instead, it means being aware of how your actions, decisions, and leadership style impact others emotionally. Understand the power of psychological influence, how confidence, decisiveness, and clarity can inspire people to follow your lead. Fourthly, build resilience through adversity by transforming challenges into opportunities for growth. Like Genghis Khan, we all face challenges in life, whether they come from personal trauma, external competition, or societal pressures. The key is to turn adversity into a source of strength. Focus on post-traumatic growth by learning from your experiences, developing a stronger sense of purpose, and using setbacks as stepping stones for greater achievements. Finally, embrace adaptive leadership by staying flexible and responsive to change. Genghis Khan's ability to adapt to changing circumstances was essential to his success. In our own lives, this means being flexible and willing to adjust our strategies when necessary. Whether in business, leadership, or personal goals, always be open to feedback. Be willing to shift your approach based on new information or changing circumstances. The life of Genghis Khan is a paradox. His achievements were unparalleled, yet his methods often crossed ethical lines. This raises important questions about the role of ruthlessness in leadership. How far can leaders push their ambitions before crossing the line into cruelty? Can extreme methods be justified by the results they yield? Genghis Khan's legacy challenges us to consider these ethical dilemmas: how to balance ambition with compassion, strategy with morality. Genghis Khan's improbable ascent reveals that true leadership isn't confined to noble birth or formal training. It is born from an unparalleled understanding of human psychology, forged in the crucible of adversity. His story is a testament to the transformative power of vision, an unwavering will, and the ability to unite disparate forces. His rise demonstrates how a singular mind, through strategic insight into human nature, can reshape the world, even from the most humble beginnings. Reflect on your own inner tribe, the people you lead or influence. How can you apply Genghis Khan's psychological lessons on unity, vision, and loyalty to build a team or community that is dedicated to achieving your impossible goals? What strategies can you implement to create your own empire of impact, inspiring loyalty and fostering unbreakable trust among those you lead? Genghis Khan's life is a compelling example of how leadership, vision, and psychological insight can change the course of history. His legacy lives on, not just in the lands he conquered, but in the psychological principles that continue to shape great leaders today. Thank you for watching. Now, go out and apply these timeless lessons to shape your own destiny.